good evening, whatever it is. Good morning. Let's start the employment income. Actually, in employment income, we are starting from the basic employment and then we'll move to other areas. In basic employment, basically, we'll be covering entire area of F6. Okay, so let's start. Basic employment. First thing which you need to understand, there are many differences between employment and self-employment. For example, when it comes to employment, you are answerable to someone, you are responsible to someone. In self-employment, actually, you are responsible to yourself. In employment, there are specific hours that you have to work. In self-employment, there are no specific hours. In employment, you will be provided tools, asset by the employer. In self-employment, you have to arrange all the tools, each and everything. So, whenever you get time, just read this once. The differences between employment and self-employment. Now, let's move ahead. Simple format, we take salary, bonus, commission. This becomes cash earnings. If we have any allowable deductions, we deduct that. We'll be studying this all, don't worry. Allowable deductions, what are these? Pension contribution paid to approved occupational pension scheme. This we have already discussed. For example, if an employee is contributing into occupational pension plan, if an employee contributes into occupational pension plan, that is treated as an expense for that employee. So it is an allowable expense which that employee can deduct from his or her employment income. Traveling expenses, which are for the sake of employment. Authorized mileage allowance, we're just about to discuss. And all these things, just a minute. Just let us discuss first concept of authorized mileage allowance. You can say approved mileage allowance also. When an employee uses his or her own car for employment purposes, then this authorized mileage allowance concept comes into the action. Repeat. When an employee uses its own car, his or her own car for employment purposes, then this authorized mileage allowance concept comes into action. According to HMRC, for first 10,000 miles, employees should be getting 45 pence per mile. Okay. Then 10,001 and above, employees should be getting 25 pence per mile. Now the question is, if employee gets less than the authorized mileage allowance, then what happens? And the second, if employee gets more than authorized mileage allowance, then what happens? Let me answer this with a question. Assuming Mr. X is an employee, he uses his own car for employment purposes, and in the tax year 21-22, let's say your examiner says Mr. X has driven 18,000 miles for employment purposes. Wow, looks like drive it to me 18,000 miles a lot per year. Oof, that's too much. And let's say his employer has paid him 40 pence per mile. Employer has reimbursed Mr. X 40 pence per mile. Now let us see how much Mr. X has received. Amount received 18,000 into 0.4, 18,000 into 0.4, it is 7,200. Now let us check, according to authorized mileage allowance, approved mileage allowance, what amount he should have received. According to HMRC, for first 10,000 mile, he was supposed to get 45 pence. And remaining 8,000 miles, he was supposed to get 25 pence per mile. Which means that he should have taken 6,500 from his employer, if I'm not wrong. Since Mr. X has received more than the authorized mileage allowance, so difference is a taxable benefit, which is 700. This 700 is a taxable benefit. On this taxable benefit, Mr. X is supposed to pay tax. Okay, one more example. So let's say I have Mr. Y also. In the tax year 21-22, Mr. Y driven his car, let's say 15,000 miles for employment purposes. And let's say his employer paid him 20 pence per mile. Assuming Mr. Y has used his car for employment purposes 15,000 miles and his employer has reimbursed him 20 pence per mile. Okay. Let us first calculate amount received. $15,000 into 0.2, that results in 3,000. Now let us see, according to authorized mileage allowance, what amount he should have received. According to authorized mileage allowance, he should have received for first 10,000 miles 45 pence per mile, and for remaining 5,000 miles he should have received 0.25 per mile. So what is the amount? He should have received 4,500. Since the amount which he has received is less than the authorized mileage allowance, the difference is a deductible expense, allowable expense. This allowable expense will be deducted from the employment income of Mr. Y. This allowable expense will be deducted from the employment income of Mr. Y. So now I strongly believe that you have understood the concept of authorized mileage allowance. These are the limits which will be given to you in exam as well. I've never seen a question on bicycle, motorcycle. Normally this comes. Passenger is 5 pence per mile. If an employee uses his or her own car for employment purposes and while driving his car, he carries passenger as well, for example. In that case, there will be an additional 5 pence per mile. Because of the passenger, he will be getting additional 5 pence per mile. But if he gets less than 5 pence per mile, difference will not be a deductible expense. But if he gets more than 5 pence per mile, difference will be a taxable benefit. In case of passenger, if he gets less than 5 pence per mile, difference will not be an allowable expense. If he gets more than 5 pence per mile, then difference is going to be a taxable benefit. But that is only for passenger. Question 19, 20, you can easily do it. I don't think so. That CC has nothing to do. All you have to do is miles and how much he has received. If, for example, look at this question number 20, he has not received anything. If someone is not receiving anything, then amount received will be 0 and authorized mileage allowance I'm going to deduct. So result is going to be a deductible allowable expense. If, for example, quickly we try this question 19, 21, 22, 12,000 miles, employer paid him 30 pence. So amount received Amount received is 3,600. Let us check authorized mileage allowance. For first 10,000 mile, he should have received 45 and then 25. So definitely it is coming 5,000. That is allowable expense. So this 1,400 will be deducted from his employment income. Question 20. Amanda drove 20,000 miles from her own car, for which 16,000 miles are for employment purposes. Authorized mileage allowance is only applicable on miles which are for employment purposes, which are 16,000 in case of question 20. And Amanda did not get any penny. So amount received is 0. Authorized mileage allowance. For first 10,000 miles, she was supposed to get 45 pence per mile. For remaining 6,000 miles, she was supposed to get 25 pence per mile. So she was supposed to get 6,000, but she did not get even a single penny. So entire 6,000 is an allowable expense. And this allowable expense will reduce her employment income. Let me tell you one more thing. Distance from home to permanent workplace is not countable. So miles between from home to permanent workplace, they are not countable. For example, if Mr. X uses his own car for employment purposes, but from home he goes to permanent workplace, miles of home till permanent workplace are not countable. But once he reaches on permanent workplace and from there he goes for the employment purposes, then obviously all the miles are countable. But if someone goes from home to temporary workplace, temporary workplace means where you have been transferred for less than 24 months. In case of temporary workplace, distance from home to temporary workplace, miles are countable. And let me explain. Temporary workplace means where you have been transferred for less than equal to 24 months. Temporary workplace means, I'm repeating it again, where you have been transferred for less than equal to 24 months, that is temporary workplace. In case of temporary workplace, distance from home to temporary workplace is countable. Okay. Now let's go to another benefit. Let's see, what is this? Now let's talk about the car benefit. Extremely important, I would say. Extremely important. Motor car benefit. Normally it comes in exam, especially in F6. How do we calculate car benefit? Let me explain this first. Car benefit. Simply take the list price of the car. List price of the car. And multiply this list price with CO2 percentage. You will get car benefit. Repeat. How do we calculate car benefit? All you need is just multiply list price of the car with CO2 percentage. We'll be discussing right now how do we calculate this list price and what about the CO2 percentage. Wait for that. Whenever an employee is given a car for his or her personal use, private use, then car benefit arises. How do we calculate car benefit? All you need is just multiply list price with CO2 percentage. Okay. When it comes to list price, okay, if employee contributes towards purchase of the car, if employee contributes towards purchase of the car, then list price reduces. Repeat. If employee contributes towards purchase of the car, then list price reduces. But the maximum contribution which employee can make towards purchase of the car is £5,000. If he contributes more than £5,000, then that amount is any amount over and above 5,000 we are going to ignore. What do you mean by this? Let's say your examiner says the list price is £20,000 and Mr. X, who is an employee, contributes £4,000 to purchase this car, to buy this car. Since he contributes 4,000, so I'm going to deduct 4. So list price is going to be 16,000. So CO2 percentage is going to be applied on this 16,000. Okay, case 2. Let's say the list price is £20,000. An examiner says Mr. X has contributed £7,000 towards purchase of the car. Assuming the given list price is £20,000 and your examiner is saying Mr. X has contributed £7,000 towards purchase of the car. In that case, maximum I'm going to deduct 5,000, remaining 2,000 I will just ignore. So list price is going to be 15,000. So someone contributes towards purchase of the car, then maximum contribution which can reduce the list price is £5,000. Okay. Now next thing. Now the question is, how do we calculate this CO2 percentage? Look at this. Car benefit percentage. The relevant base level for CO2 emission is 55 grams per kilometer. All this we are going to cover just for a second. This is actually 55. 51 gram till 54 it is 14%. In case of 55 grams it is 15%. This is 1%, not 0. A 1% percentage applies to electric powered motor car with 0 CO2 emission. Even a car does not have a CO2 emission, still 1% is applicable. All this information will be given to you in exam, don't worry. For hybrid electric motor cars, CO2 emission between 1 and 50 grams per kilometer, electric range of the motor car is relevant. If the electric range is 130 miles or more, then 1% is applicable. If the range is from 70 till 129 miles, it is 4%. If it goes 40 till 69, 7%, 30 till 39, it goes to 11, less than 30, it goes to 13%. So it's very logical. Electric range reduces, so appropriate percentages increases. Because as soon as the car finishes the electric range, then CO2 emission starts. So leave this, it will be given to you in exam. For example, let's say if I tell you the car list price is £20,000 and it is a hybrid car, and let's say electric range is 25 miles. Okay, CO2 emission is, let's say, 30 grams per kilometer. It means it falls here. but electric range is 25 miles. If electric range is 25 miles, then we have to apply 13% because it says less than 30 miles, 13%. So car benefit, how will you calculate car benefit? Just multiply this 20,000 with 13%. So you will get your car benefit. 20,000 into 13%. It is 260. 2,600 is your car benefit. Okay. Sometimes what happens, your examiner says we have given car for the private use, as well as company also gives fuel for the private use. Fuel benefit is fixed, which is 24,600, and you need to multiply this 24,600 into appropriate percentage, which is CO2 percentage. Simply CO2 percentage. How do we calculate CO2 percentage? Just wait for a minute. Then I'm going to show you the calculation. So if an employee is given car as well as fuel benefit, then how do we calculate fuel benefit? 24,600, this amount is fixed, which will be given to you in exam. Just multiply that 24,600 with CO2 percentage. If someone is having a big family and does not need a car, that person is asking for a van, for example. Then van benefit is 3,500 for tax year 21-22. And if van is given with the fuel, then the fuel benefit is 669. In case of van, CO2 percentage is irrelevant. So someone is given a van for the private use, then the usage benefit is 3,500 for the whole tax year, and the fuel benefit is 669. Okay, let me discuss first few things relating to CO2 percentage, and then I'll come back to these values again. That's great. This will really help you a lot. Okay. This table will be given to you in exam. CO2 emission 51 till 54 grams, it is 14% for a petrol car. For 55 grams, it is 15%. After 55 grams, each complete additional 5 grams emission above 55 grams, 1% increases. Repeat. After 55 grams, after 55 grams, on each extra 5 grams, there will be 1% rise in the percentage. But the maximum is going to be 13%. Let me explain all this. For example, take it like this. For example, Mr. X has been given a petrol car for private use, and examiner is saying that CO2 emission is 174 grams per kilometer. We just need to calculate CO2 percentage. How do we calculate? A very important point is the given car is a petrol car. CO2 percentage is equal to, for 55 grams we have 15%, which is fixed. For 55 grams per kilometer we have 15%. After that, you always have to round down this value. Make it such a value after round down which can be divided by 5. So it is 174, I'm writing 170. From this 170, I'm going to deduct 55. Why 55? Because for this 55, I have 15%. Divide this with 5. Let me use the calculator. 170 minus 55 divided by 5. It is coming 23%. The answer of this is 23%. Plus 15. So altogether is going to be 38%. But maximum percentage cannot exceed 37%. If mathematically your answer is more than 37, then you have to restrict yourself to 37. No matter your car is a petrol car or a diesel car, maximum percentage is going to be 37. Let me give you another example. Let's say we have 129 grams per kilometer CO2 emission. An examiner is asking us just calculate CO2 percentage. How do we calculate for 129? Actually, for first 55 grams per kilometer, we have a fixed percentage 15%. Let's say the car is a petrol car, okay. After that, 129 you have to round it down, make it a value which can be divided by 5. So 129, I'm writing 125. Always round down to the nearest 5. Always round down to the nearest 5. From 125, I'm going to deduct 55 divided by 5. So I'm getting 14%. So it means your CO2 percentage is going to be 29%. So now I believe you have a good idea how do we calculate the CO2 percentage. Very important point, if your answer comes more than 37%, no matter whichever car is with you, you have to restrict yourself to 37%. Okay. If employee has been given a diesel car, which car? Diesel car. And the examiner says this diesel car, if diesel car does not meet RDE2 standard, then 4% surcharge applies. Repeat. Number one, the given car is a diesel car, and the second your examiner says this diesel car, for example, does not meet RDE2 standard. It will be written in the question either it is meeting RDE2 standard or not. You're not supposed to go and read what is this RDE2 standard. Obviously, something to do with the environment. If it is not meeting RDE2 standard, it means the car is not so much environmental friendly. That is why additional 4% will be added to the CO2 percentage, which will increase your taxable benefit, and eventually your income tax will increase also. But let me repeat, if diesel car does not meet RDE2 standard, then you need to add 4% surcharge. But if it is a diesel car and it meets RDE2 standard, then there is no difference between petrol car and diesel car when it comes to calculating CO2 percentage. Repeat. For example, the given car is a diesel car. Second, examiner says this diesel car meets RDE2 standard. If a diesel car meets RDE2 standard, then there is no difference between diesel car and petrol car when it comes to calculating CO2 percentage. For example, let me give you another example. Let's say let me take Mr. Y. Let's say Mr. Y is being given a diesel car. Having CO2 emission, let's say 108 grams per kilometer, and car does not meet RDE2 standard. Okay. You are just supposed to calculate CO2 percentage. How do we calculate? Number one, since it is a diesel car and it's not meeting RDE2 standard, do one thing. Just deal with this car as a petrol car. Whatever your answer comes, you need to just add 4% into that. But you have to make sure. You cannot exceed 37%. Either your car is a diesel car, petrol car, diesel car does not meet the RDE2 standard. In any case, you cannot exceed 37%. Now let us focus on this question, Mr. Y. How do we solve this 108 grams per kilometer? First 55 grams per kilometer, we have 15%. After that, 108 will be rounded down to the nearest 5. 105 minus 55 divided by 5. Let's see what comes. 105 minus 55 divided by 5, it is coming 10%. Since it is a diesel car and does not meet RD2 standard, so you have to add additional 4%. Just add additional 4% surcharge. So your CO2 percentage is going to be 29%. So now I'm going to multiply list price with 29%. Very simple, I believe. So it should not disturb you. Another example, another explanation. For example, Mr. X has given car for his private use, personal use. Car is a petrol car having, let's say, CO2 emission 128 grams per kilometer. Okay, with a list price of 28,000 pound. Mr. X pays 100 pound per month to his employer due to using this car. Let's say Mr. X has given a car for a private use. Car is a petrol car having CO2 emission 128 grams per kilometer with a list price 28,000. But what Mr. X is doing, Mr. X is paying 100 per month to his employer because of due to using this car. Now listen and listen carefully. If employee contributes towards usage of the car, then the car benefit reduces for that employee. Repeat. If an employee contributes towards usage of the car, then car benefit reduces. So let's say he has been given a car throughout the tax year. Let us first calculate CO2 percentage. It is 128 grams per kilometer. For first 55 grams per kilometer, we have 15%. After that, this 128 is going to be round down to the nearest 5. I'm writing 125 minus 55. I need to divide this with 5 as well. I'm getting 14%. This car is a petrol car, no surcharge, nothing. It is 29%. So here comes the car benefit. Take the list price, which is 28,000. Multiply this with 29%. 28,000 into this. We are getting 8,120. Now what is happening? Mr. X is also contributing towards usage of the car. 100 per month he pays to the employer. So if employee contributes towards usage of the car, it reduces their car benefit. Less payment to the employer. Which is 100 into 12, 1200. So here comes the taxable benefit. 8120 deduct 1200. Taxable benefit is 6,920. Okay, let me tell you one more thing. Sometimes what happens, your examiner, what he does, he tells you that I have given a car for Mr. X for the private use. Okay, so he gives you CO2 emission as well. And then examiner says, uh, being an employer, APLC, what they are doing, they are, let's say, affording, they are bearing the maintenance cost of the car as well. An employer is paying road license fee as well. So now, dear student, listen and listen carefully. If employer is paying for the maintenance cost of the car, if employer is paying for road license, then these both things we need to ignore. You are not going to take them as taxable benefit, because while calculating CO2 percentage, these benefits are already built in. So no need to calculate them separately, no need to add them separately. So if the employer is saying I am bearing the service maintenance cost of this car as well, I am paying road license fee, you are not going to take these things as taxable benefit, because in CO, while calculating CO2 percentage, these benefits are already added. So no need to add them separately. So now you should be having a really good idea about the CO2 emission, how it works. The diesel car meets RDE2 standard, then 4% surcharge for diesel car does not apply. If examiner says that given car is a diesel car, and second it says it meets RDE2 standard, then there is no difference when it comes to calculating CO2 percentage in case of diesel and petrol car. When diesel car does not meet RDE2 standard, then 4% surcharge applies. Okay, if some, let's say Mr. X is given a car as well as a fuel, then how do we calculate fuel benefit? It's very simple. You have to take 24,600, which is fixed. Simply multiply this with CO2 percentage. You will have your fuel benefit. If the car has been given during the tax year, and the fuel was also provided during the tax year, then you have to time apportion this benefit also. So n upon 12. For example, employee was given car only for 8 months during the tax year, then obviously the car benefit is for 8 months, so obviously fuel benefit is going to be 8 months as well. If the car has been given for the throughout the tax year and the fuel also it has been given throughout the tax year, then n is going to be 12. 12 upon 12 means 1. So normally the importance of this n upon 12 only comes into the action when fuel was not given throughout the tax year. Then n upon 12 is important. Otherwise, there's no need to use this n upon 12 if the fuel was given throughout the tax year. But there's one more concept. What is that? If employee partially reimburses the fuel benefit to the employer, then according to HMRC, partial reimbursement by the employee to the employer does not reduce fuel benefit. Repeat. If an employee reimburses partially the fuel benefit, then according to HMRC, partial reimbursement of fuel benefit does not reduce taxable benefit for the employee. You need to remember this. And if employee reimburses all the fuel benefit which is provided to the employee, if he reimburses all the fuel cost to the employer, then obviously we will say during the tax year there wasn't any fuel benefit, because 100% of the benefit was reimbursed by the employer to the employer. If 100% of the fuel cost was given by the employee to the employer, in that case there will be no fuel benefit. For example, the employer says to Mr. X that I will give the fuel benefit. Then the employee replies, if you give the fuel benefit, I will return 100% of the fuel cost to you. If Mr. X is going to return 100% of cost of fuel to the employer, then obviously there will be no fuel benefit. But if Mr. X reimburses partially for the fuel benefit, then partial payment for the fuel benefit does not reduces fuel benefit. Okay, let's move ahead. Here comes the question. Okay, I would simply say one thing. You should pause the video, attempt this question 21, and then obviously you can always unpause the video. Pause the video, attempt the question, then unpause the video. So I strongly believe that you have tried this question. Now you can check always your answer from this video. Mm, Calculate Charles' taxable car and fuel benefit for the tax year 21-22. Okay. Charles took up employment with Weavers Limited on July 2021. So whatever is going to be the benefit, it will not be for the whole tax year because he has just joined the company on 1st July 2021. His remuneration package included a petrol-driven car. List price is 24,000. He took the delivery of the car on 1st July. Day one, he took the delivery of the car as well. CO2 emission is 209 grams per kilometer. As a condition of the car being made available to him for private motoring, Charles paid 100 per month for the car and £50 per month for petrol. Now listen carefully. If Charles is contributing towards usage of the car, it reduces the car benefit. But if Charles reimburses partially for the fuel benefit, then partial reimbursement of the fuel benefit does not reduces fuel benefit. Weaver Limited incurred the following expenses in respect of the Charles car. Servicing will not result in an additional benefit. Insurance will not result in an additional benefit. Fuel will see what to do. Maintenance will not result in an additional benefit. This 2500 fuel will not result in additional benefit. Why? Because we have to calculate fuel benefit by using the method which is given by HMRC. The benefit of calculating fuel benefit is 24,600 into CO2 percentage. And whatever benefit we are calculating, the maximum benefit is going to be for 9 months. Why 9 months? Because Charles started the job on 1st July 2021. From 1st July 2021, if I go till 5th April 2022, so obviously we have 9 months. Let us first calculate CO2 percentage and then other things. It is a petrol car, 209 grams per kilometer. So look at this. For 55 grams per kilometer, we have 15%. Now 209, you have to round down to the nearest 5. So 205 minus 55 divided by 5. 205 is, I'm getting 30%. It comes to 45%. But I cannot use 45. Instead of 45, I'll stick to 37%. Okay, let's calculate the car benefit. List price into 37%. List price of the car is 24,000 into 37%. And just 9 months. So 24,000 to 37%, 9 upon 12, it is 6660. Now since Charles is making payment due to usage of the car, so payment for usage of the car reduces the car benefit. We need to deduct payment to employer, payment for usage of the car. It is 100 per month into 9. So here comes the taxable benefit 5760. 5760 is the taxable benefit. Charles is also provided with the petrol as well, fuel as well. Because Charles is reimbursing £50 as fuel benefit to the employer, which means he has been given a fuel benefit as well. And fuel benefit does not reduces due to partial reimbursement. So just calculate the fuel benefit. He's contributing 100 per month. So far we have 9 months. We have already. Fuel benefit does not reduce it due to partial reimbursement. I went somewhere else. It is 24,600 into CO2 percentage, which is 37%, 9 by 12. So 24,600 into 37%, 9 by 12. What I'm getting? I'm getting 6,826.5 if I go for round off. So benefit is going to be 6,827. So we are having a taxable benefit of 5,760. We are having a taxable benefit of 6,827. So there is going to be a total taxable benefit 12,587. So total taxable benefit is 12587. So total taxable benefit is 12,587. That's simply great. Now let's talk about accommodation benefit. When an employee is given rent-free accommodation, number one, there are two types of accommodation. One accommodation is a job-related accommodation, and another is not job-related accommodation. There are two types of accommodations. Job-related accommodation, not job-related accommodation. There are two types of job. There are two types of accommodation. One is job-related accommodation, and another is not job-related accommodation. Question, sir, what do you mean by job-related accommodation? Actually, job-related accommodation means the accommodation where you have to live in order to provide the services, in order to perform the job. Otherwise, you cannot perform your job. Otherwise, you cannot provide services. Example, let's say you are supposed to give security to the chief minister house. If you are supposed to give security to the chief minister house, so obviously you have to live over there. So in case of job related accommodation, rent benefit is exempt. Repeat. In case of job related accommodation, rent benefit is exempt. Okay, now let's come to the not job related accommodation. Not job related accommodation means the accommodation is given to you because of the employment, but it is not necessary that you have to live in that accommodation in order to perform the job. If you don't want to stay there, it's up to you. You can even stay at your home. But the point is, not job related accommodation means it is not necessary that you have to live in that job, only then you can perform the duties and services. For example, let's say I'm a teacher, alhamdulillah, and let's say, for example, XYZ organization says to me that, so you have to do one thing. If you want to teach in our university, okay, so we give you the accommodation as well. Let's say the university is in Karachi, where I am residing. So I am just going to tell them that's perfectly fine where I'm living. I don't need your accommodation. You need just my services, and I'm supposed to teach. I can easily come from my home to teach at your university. So I have no issue at all. So because it is not the job related accommodation, I can perform my duties either I live over there or not. So if the accommodation is not a job related accommodation, then rent benefit is higher of 1 and 2. One is rent paid by the employer, second, annual value of the rent. Rent paid by the employer, and the second is annual value of the rent. Annual value of the rent means market value of the rent. So whichever is higher, it is the rent benefit. In case of not job related accommodation, rent benefit is higher of rent paid by the employer. Second, annual value of the rent. Annual value of the rent means the market value of the rent. Okay. If accommodation is the owned accommodation, if accommodation is owned by the employer, then rent benefit is annual value. Because if accommodation is owned by the employer, if employer is the one who has purchased that accommodation, then obviously rent paid by the employer cannot come. Rent paid by the employer can only arises if accommodation is not owned by the employer. An employer simply gets the property on rent and then he gives that property to you. Only in that case, rent paid by the employer and annual value of the rent, whichever is higher, comes. But if the accommodation is owned by the employer, then there is no issue of rent paid by the employer arises. Then always your basic benefit, rent benefit, is equal to the annual value of the rent. Okay. Next, if accommodation is owned by the employer, okay, plus it is an expensive accommodation, plus the accommodation is expensive accommodation. Two things. Number one, the accommodation is owned by the employer, purchased by the employer, and second, it is an expensive accommodation. Question: what do you mean by expensive accommodation? I'm coming to that, but let me explain something before that. Number one, if the accommodation is owned by the employer, and second, it is an expensive accommodation, in that case, additional benefit arises. Additional benefit will only arise in addition to the rent benefit when accommodation is owned by the employer plus it is an expensive accommodation. Now there are two questions: how do we calculate additional benefit, and second, what do you mean by expensive accommodation? So let me clear this. Expensive accommodation means having cost plus capital expenditure more than 75,000 before the start of tax year. Before the start of tax year. Repeat. Expensive accommodation means having cost plus the capital expenditure. The value is more than £75,000 before the start of the tax year. Such accommodation is an expensive accommodation. Expensive accommodation means cost, original cost, plus the capital expenditure, both. If we add them, the answer comes more than 75,000, but before the start of the tax year, which simply means I'm adding previous capital expenditure into the cost of that accommodation. I'm not adding current year capital expenditure. If the answer comes more than 75,000, then this is an expensive accommodation. And in case of an expensive accommodation, additional benefit also arises. How do we calculate additional benefit? Let me tell you this. We are having a rent benefit. Then simply add, let's take the additional benefit. How do we calculate additional benefit? For example, original cost plus capital expenditure before the start of the tax year, it is let's say 120. You just deduct 75,000, which is fixed, into 2%. 2% is the official interest rate in the Finance Act 2021. Then into n upon 12. Why n upon 12? If employee has been given a property during the tax year, let's say he was not having the property for the whole tax year, then n upon 12 also comes. So assuming before the start of the tax year, original cost plus capital expenditure, the value is 120. From this, I need to deduct 75,000 and then I have to take 2% of this and then n upon 12. N upon 12 is only applicable when employee was not having this expensive accommodation throughout the tax year. Then additional benefit is going to be time apportion. Obviously, the rent benefit will also be time apportion if the accommodation was not given to the employee throughout the tax year. So let me tell you a few more things relating to this expensive accommodation. It is here. Okay, when do we replace cost with the market value? If employer has owned accommodation for more than 6 years before it is first provided to the employee, then original cost will be replaced with the market value. Repeat. If accommodation is the owned accommodation by the employer and more than 6 years have been passed before it is first provided to the employee, in that case we replace cost with the market value. Then whatever is the market value, we need to deduct 75,000, then take 2%, which is the official interest rate, in order to calculate additional benefit. So we have to take the normal rent benefit, then add additional benefit if an accommodation is an expensive accommodation, and you will have total annual benefit, and from this total annual benefit we deduct employee's contribution. For example, due to having this accommodation, employee is paying, let's say, £50 per month to the employer. Due to living in that accommodation, employee is paying to the employer, then this payment will reduce the accommodation benefit. Repeat. If employee is making payment due to living in that accommodation to the employer, then that payment will reduce his taxable benefit. And one or two more things. What is that? If employer says, I'm going to give you rent-free accommodation, number one. Number two, employer says, I will pay the electricity bills as well. Employer is saying, I'm going to pay a water tax of that accommodation as well. Now listen carefully. If employer has given you the accommodation, rent-free accommodation for the private use. Second, if employer is paying, let's assume, electricity bill of the accommodation as well. If employer is paying electricity bill of the accommodation as well, then whatever is the electricity bill, it will be treated as your taxable benefit. If employer is paying for the electricity bill, then entire electricity bill paid by the employer is a taxable benefit for the employee. Okay, what it says? Irrespective of market value, the additional charge will only apply to a property where the original cost plus improvement completed prior to the start of tax year exceeds what? 75,000. Basically, additional benefit issue will only arises when accommodation is an expensive accommodation. Expensive means before the start of the tax year, original cost plus capital expenditure exceeds 75,000. Only then additional benefit arises. Okay. If let's say before the starting of the tax year, if accommodation is having a value of just 50,000 and there are no capital expenditure, nothing. Now whatever market value is given, it is irrelevant for us. So first the accommodation has to be expensive accommodation. And after that, more than 6 years have been passed before providing to the employee. In that case, we replace cost with the market value. Okay. So now I strongly believe you have a really good idea about this accommodation thing. For example, let's say Mr. X joined the company on 30th June 2021. He was given rent-free accommodation for private use, rent-free accommodation. Annual value of the rent is, let's say, 3,600. APLC owned the accommodation. Let's say costing £90,000. We just need to, this is the only information which we have been given, and we need to calculate taxable benefit for the tax year 21-22. So since he has joined the company on 30th June 2021, from here if I go till 5th April 2022, so I have only 9 months. So rent basic benefit 3,600 into 9 upon 12. I'm getting 2,700 if I'm not wrong. Then I have to take additional benefit as well. 90,000, you need to deduct 75 from this. Take 2%, 9 upon 12. Because accommodation was not given throughout the tax year. The reason being is he has just joined the company during the tax year. Okay. So it is coming 225. So here comes the taxable benefit. 2925. That's simply great. So taxable benefit is 2,925. So this is the end of today's lecture. Dear student, in the next class, I'll be discussing some of the exempt benefits, and then I'll be discussing beneficial loan benefit as well, and few more things. So I will try my best that in the coming class, we should try to complete the basic employment income so that we can go towards main area of the employment income, which are share options and termination benefits. So thank you very much for watching this lecture.